Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Monday mornings from 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about the things that affect you in your condominium or homeowners association, some of the issues that you may be dealing with, and some of the things that you may have questions about. So whether you're a longtime resident here in a condo or homeowners association in Florida, or you're brand new to the condo environment in Florida, since we've got thousands and thousands of people moving here every day, you may not have had an opportunity to experience the condo or homeowners association life here in Florida, and it's not that bad. It's actually pretty good, but sometimes it's there's some unknowns. So, my name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA and a licensed community association manager, and along with me is Peter Mullengarden. Peter is our attorney, and he's been working with being host of the show. He's been host of the show now for about 16, 17 years along with me. And we're here just to help you out. So there's a couple ground rules I have that I just have to mention, and then we'll get to our first caller. But a couple things. One, we don't need your association name, and we don't really need your name, but any name will do. But we do need something to call you. But we don't need the association. The reason is that we don't have your documents. And so it doesn't help us a lot knowing what association is. And in fact, sometimes some of our listeners think, well, that's not me, so it doesn't apply. And it turns out that many times it does apply, or it's very, very close. For the very, very close, that's why we will talk a little bit broader on a question sometimes and continue to talk about it. Because there are other associations out there that have maybe similar but not exactly the same situation. And so speaking of documents, as many of you know, we give the best answer we can, but we call them radio answers, and that's because we don't have your documents, and many people know that the documents can significantly impact your answer. So we're going to base our answer on your interpretation of the documents, which we know from time to time can be conflicting and confusing, and the standard state laws, rules, regulations, and things like that, and standard practices, court cases, and those type of things that typically apply. But otherwise, if you're going to go to court with it, we may be a good source for some preliminary information to help you make decisions. But if you're going to go to court, you need to contact somebody like Peter and have him meet with you, look at your documents, and give you an answer. So anyway, good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
Good, good. So, we've got our first caller this morning. We'll go to Edna. Go ahead.
Okay. What options do I have as a homeowner in a condo association against a board that is not following the condo documents and also the rules that were just put into place by a previous board?
Okay, Peter, you're on.
So what exactly are they doing? I mean, this board is doing what incorrectly? I'm sorry.
Okay, they're not following the documents. The one specifically says that we will follow any rules that are in place by our county, which really refers to short-term rentals.
Well, I mean, if this is a condominium association?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I mean, if any condominium association, if you believe they're not adhering to their documents, you can write to the association, write to the board, and basically say, that they're in violation of, X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C. Give them X amount of time to stop violating it or start complying, whichever one it is. And then in the same letter, say that if you don't, follow the documents or, stop violating the documents within X amount of days, then you're going to pursue either litigation or arbitration, most likely arbitration, depending upon what the violation is. And then if they don't, then you can file a petition for arbitration against the association seeking that relief. That is you could try to complain to the division, but generally the division only gets involved in a complaint style action when they're violating statute. In other words, when they're violating the Condominium Act,
right,
or one of our admin code. If they're violating your own documents, they aren't going to enforce it in that way, but they will enforce it through the arbitration process.
Okay, I have not had much luck with the DBPR.
Well, I mean, the other thing is if they're violating, some sort of, county regs, and there's potentially code enforcement that way, but I don't think that's going to be an avenue here. I'm not, sure on that, depending on the nature of, of the violation, but that's your remedy. I mean, you may want to, I always hate to shield for other lawyers, but you may want to consult with an attorney, quite frankly, and have he or she assist, because at the end of the day, you can jump up and down all you want, and tell the board they're doing the wrong thing, point out what they're doing wrong, have 100 of your fellow owners point out what they're doing wrong. But if they don't start complying, all that pointing out to them and jumping up and down isn't going to do anything. The only other remedy is the political remedy, where you vote them out either through the annual meeting process or through the recall process. And you put in a board that is going to conduct themselves properly. So you either have the political remedy, which is, again, through the recall or through the annual meeting election process, or, like I said, through the arbitration and or lawsuit.
Okay. All right.
And Ed, one of the things too is, as Peter mentioned, is that there are, one of the things that we always talk about on here that makes condo law so difficult is that there are a lot of things that come into play, positive and negative on a situation. Sometimes you're talking about fair labor practices. You're talking about real estate law. Sometimes you're talking about constitutional law. There's all kinds of things that make it difficult. That's why, frankly, arbitration is usually the easiest source, because it's less costly. But and fortunately, condos have the ability to go to arbitration versus HOAs, which only have a mediation process that's non-binding. But you may look too at some of these things, whether or not the individual is violating some other law other than condo law as well. Peter talked about code violations and that kind of thing. Now, I will tell you, my experience has been you don't get the county, for example, moving very quickly on an issue that they want the association to handle. But it doesn't mean that you can't force the county to move too. And sometimes it may be a straighter, simpler form of action. And you may be able to get them to do something. It could be if somebody's operating a commercial enterprise out of their home, for example. It's that is probably unlicensed, and so you can attack that way. And then that may at least put some pressure on the association to follow county ordinances. Otherwise, they may fine the association. One of the things I know that's an issue right now is the whole Airbnb and some of the rental issues that.
Yes, that's part of this.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what part of the problem is from the board's perspective going forward is that the state and they're up there right now. One of the bills that I think that Peter was talking about last week, or that they were talking about last week on the show, was has to do with the Airbnb situation, and the state is trying to override county rules. Now, as far as I've heard, that wouldn't extend to condos. In other words, they wouldn't override the condo documents, but there is talk about at the state level. There's real talk about not allowing associations to restrict Airbnb, and there's been some lawsuits. The main which was that an Airbnb operation is a commercial entity, and therefore they should have to be zoned correctly and all that. Should be zoned for commercial, but they lost on the government's lost on that.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago where they held that was residential use.
Yeah, so right now. Frankly, on that issue of Airbnb and the rentals there,
That's going to be tough.
Yeah, I would, because the legislature right now is potentially passing, is passing some legislation that may make that more and more difficult to go and challenge. So that I would, if that's one of the main issues, I would definitely call my local senator and congressperson and get on them and tell them, look, we don't want that in our associations. That's not right. That's not fair. We didn't choose to live in a hotel. We chose
That's
to,
right.
we
That's
chose
the exact problem.
right. And, and there are some of these associations because of that are in effect becoming hotels. And that creates a whole bunch of problems. As you know, you can't get financing for mortgages because it doesn't meet the criteria. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have clamped down a little bit more on that. They've always had restrictions on the number of rentals that can be in the community. We used to play a game a little bit where, they'd come in and look at it. And if they looked at it in November or October or anytime during the summer, you'd probably have 2 units rented. The rest of the units were not rented. But then during season, that might jump up to 30 or 40% of the units were rented because the homeowner wasn't coming down this year and decides to rent it out or rents it to a friend or whatever, and then you got real high numbers, and so they don't qualify. And so
right, I think we're probably about 50% at this point, and some of them are renting even for one night.
Yeah, and that's the trouble. And if your documents, there's a situation where if your documents prohibit that kind of thing, that you do have, you have to encourage the board, at least in the short run, to enforce the documents. Otherwise, you're going to run into, long-term problems with lack of enforcement. So
we're already there.
Yeah. And so I think, but the problem you got too, like I said, is you're not going to get any help from the state legislature. You might get some help from the county government. That might be an avenue. So I would take a look at that. But
although the counties and the cities have been very reluctant to lock horns with Airbnb, just historically. I mean, it's just the Airbnbs.
They want the tourist tax revenue.
Well, a little bit, but I tell you what.
Also, because Airbnb is very well funded, exceedingly litigious.
Yeah.
And it's just tough. It's tough.
I will tell you, where you do get some help, Edna, is that a lot of the municipalities, or some of the municipalities, have gotten ahead of the game, and what they're worried about was not the Airbnb situation. But it shuts off the Airbnb as a sideline. Is they're worried about the halfway houses and the rehabilitation facilities. And so if you can have people there for small, short periods of time, you can have multiple families, or you can have beds rented and that kind of thing. And especially, I know Stewart jumped on that early on. They were worried about that. So they put some restrictions that I think are probably, as good as you can get. They're still iffy, but they put some restrictions on that. So you probably got some opportunity there for enforcement if people are violating those restrictions in the city of Stewart. And some of the counties did something similar when they were trying to restrict the number of homes that were becoming rehabilitation facilities. So I'd take a look at that, see what maybe the local municipality has done in the area that your association is, because you might get some outside help there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Yeah. I appreciate this program, and always appreciate your responses.
No problem. Thanks for calling in, and I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I'll give the number just in case. Edna already had it, which is good. That's what we tell you. Write the number down, and it's good for other shows, and it's good for our show. And then that way, you call in, you don't have to wait in line. It's 220-9788. That's 772 area code 220-9788. 220-WSTU is the number in the studio. And like I say, that's the number for a lot of other shows here. It's the studio number. So a lot of the shows allow calls or questions, and you can call in, and Evan will pick up, and he'll probably help you out a little bit with what's going on and help you with getting you on the air here. And we'll certainly take your question and do the best we can. We appreciate that question by Edna. That is, and that's it's a good example of the type of thing. Edna had a very specific situation, but and we gave her some help broader than maybe her problem. And then, we had an opportunity there to talk about the individual issue, which frankly is probably also being dealt with by a number of other associations. So it was, it's kind of a good example of what we try to do. So we don't have Edna's documents specifically, so we can't tell her, well, here, look in this paragraph in this section, and this is what it says, and you should, challenge that, and, write to the board, say you're in violation of such and such. We can't really do that because we don't have those documents, and we don't have to see if there's any kind of overriding factor in it. But like I said, if you're thinking about doing that, you can call somebody like Peter, and he'll sit down with you. He'll look at those documents and see, what's the best way to approach it. Because I will tell you that I'm surprised, because most associations are pretty much on Edna's camp right now in terms of wanting to restrict these overnight, especially, but even these short-term 1 week rentals. They're very hard on the association. Makes it very difficult security-wise. You have people coming and going who the other members don't recognize. And, it's one of the advantages of living in a condominium or a homeowners association, but particularly a condominium here in Florida, is that people get to know their neighbors. They don't necessarily have to be friends and hang out all the time with them, but you know who your neighbor is. And when you don't see your neighbor, or you see somebody other than your neighbor, and it protects your property. That somebody's kind of keeping an eye out, and that's a good thing. And in this day of COVID, that's one of the things that's made Florida a good place to have to quarantine, is that you do have people around in the community that know who you are. You're here every season, and so they know when you don't show up. They know, and kind of when you when you don't go out for a while, they know. And so that's a great advantage of the communal living that you get in a condominium association. There's some disadvantages, but that's a great advantage, and that camaraderie and the safety and security that you get. And that's broken down a lot by somebody who's renting their unit out, every day or every week. It's one thing maybe if you're, every 3 times a year or 4 times a year or something like that, where you could do it, once a quarter, or so. But to do that overnight, plus it makes it almost impossible to screen the people that are renting, and it is important to be able to screen those tenants for the safety of for your own residents. You need to be able to make sure, do some kind of checks on the tenants to make sure that there's not background issues, that they're not going to destroy common property, or that they haven't had a problem someplace else. Remember, they're coming in not thinking of this as a home. They're coming in thinking of this as a hotel room at that point. And I think when somebody leases your home for a month or 3 months, they realize they're leasing your home. It's a furnished place. When people come in for the day or for the weekend, I'm not so sure that they really look on that as somebody's home. I think they look on it more as a hotel room. And, that's why I disagree a little bit with that court response. I do think that Airbnb is a commercial enterprise. It gets taxed as a commercial enterprise. And, there's a lot of other issues with it. So anyway, that's just some of the stuff there that I think it was a good question. We appreciate it. So if you have anything you want to talk about, whether it's along that line or any other problem that you're having, please give us a call, 772-220-9788. Again, 772-220-WSTU. It's a number in the studio, and that's how you can get a hold of us. Peter, I know you've been dealing with some of these issues off and on now for a couple years. This Airbnb situation has gotten to be a real, like you said, they're very they have a big deep pocket to challenge these lawsuits, and they are aggressively challenging them. And plus, they're spending a lot of money on lobbying and and trying to shortcut the process by getting state laws changed that would override the local ordinances and the local documents.
No, it's true. I mean, I think Allison mentioned last week when she was talking about legislation that, there's legislation now being proposed for the homeowner associations under Chapter 720 to basically, allow this use, and especially, grandfather in anything, that you can't prohibit it going forward. So if you do want to prohibit it, or try to, now is the time to do it through amending your documents. And in my opinion, you can prohibit the short-term rentals if you amend your documents, and especially if you do them now for the HOAs. For condos, as we've talked about on the air before, they also have their own type of grandfathering. It's been there for several years, where any kind of amendment dealing with leasing, as far as prohibiting leasing or prohibiting or changing the frequency or the duration of leases, you have the grandfathering aspect that if you don't vote for it, your unit is grandfathered under the existing leasing restrictions until it's the unit's conveyed. And then similarly, if you vote for it, then your unit will be subject to it. So again, they are enforceable if your documents are amended. It's not, I'll be honest, it's not the easiest thing in the world to enforce. You do have to, you got to jump through the hoops. You got to prove it that they are violating the restrictions. And oftentimes it's a problem because, with the short-term leasing, they're there and then they're gone.
Right.
But it is possible to get a, injunction prohibiting that owner from doing it in the future. And if they violate it again, then they're in violation. They're in contempt of that order. Hopefully, if you got an order, that they can't do it. I agree with you. I was disappointed in that case. I think it was out of the, I apologize for me not remember exactly. I think it was either the 5th or the 2nd district. So it wasn't, our district, so to speak.
Right.
But it's still an appellate case. Okay. So unless this district comes, with a different case, that is the law, the appellate law for the state. And I did disagree with it. I mean, I thought it was kind of crazy, actually, to say that was residential. They said it was residential because people were sleeping there, it had a bathroom, Well, that would make every hotel then residential.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was just going to say. That makes hotel
restaurant. I just thought it was kind of ridiculous. That's just saying that any kind of short-term anything is not commercial under that analysis. So, again, it wasn't, something I agreed with, and maybe we'll have another district come up with a contrary appellate case on that. You can enforce. I mean, you can. I mean, when you cut to the chase, or when you get to the bottom line, if your documents say you can't lease more than X amount of times a year or X amount of times in a certain month period, and the lease can't be for less than X months or whatever, that to me, that's still enforceable. And that cuts against the grain of the short-term rental. Whether you even mention Airbnb or VRBO or HomeAway, and there's a few of these platforms that are doing the transient short-term rentals. You can obviously expressly exclude those too, prohibit those, but in essence, they fall within the net when you say you can only rent twice a year for not less than, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever. But again, when it happens, you still gotta go through the process of proving it, and but that's with any violation,
right?
And the documents, and I've said this many times, so I guess I'll repeat myself. They don't enforce themselves. Still have to go through like we're explaining with the last caller. You gotta write the demand letters, give an opportunity to cure, tell them if they don't cure, you're going to take legal action. arbitration and or litigation, and then file the action. You have to prove the case through your evidence, whether eyewitnesses, affidavits, this that. So again, I'm not trying to be discouraging. That's not my point here. But my point here is that the joke is my magic wand is broken, right? So you can't just wave a wand and make things wonderful. There's going to be people that just, for whatever reason, don't want to follow the rules, right?
Oh, yeah.
Besides you, Mark, there's others out there.
That couple, they're all friends of mine.
Yeah, I know. Evil Empire.
Yes.
Mark Brechtel.
That's right. That's right.
But and I know it's discouraging, and you just scratch your head and go, why don't they just do the right thing? Well, some people don't do the right thing. And you do have to have a board that is willing to take the extra effort or make the effort to do it. And I'm just speaking the obvious here. This is not anything that's any kind of magic brilliance.
Well, and the money's big, and that's why some of these people are getting into this thing because
and also one problem is like in her community, I said, well, try, maybe there's a political resolution, but if 50+% of your owners are doing this rental, they're not going to want to put in a different board.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's going to start enforcing that stuff. And that's another problem. Another problem is, when it sweeps the community, where you now have the people who don't want this happening are in the minority. Okay. And the people who want it to happen are now in the majority. Well, what does the community want now? Okay. Maybe the community actually wants short-term rentals. It's changed.
Yeah.
And through the years from a resident, from a owner-occupied community to a more of a rental community. That happens.
Right.
I'm not saying, again, I don't live there, I don't own there, but you see it in different kind of things. You see places go from we all hate trucks to, hey, we think pickup trucks are great, and let's be a truck community. Again, that's not the greatest analogy in the world, but I'm just saying, communities do change sometimes.
Yeah.
Whether for whatever reason. So
one of the things, and I can't stress it enough, is that if you're in a community like that, you may, you need to really take a look at what it's going to do to your ability to resell your unit. Because
you may want to sell and get out now.
Well, yeah, especially if it hasn't made the switch yet, hasn't flipped over, because you get into that area where you're over 25%, rentals. You can't get long-term financing. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac they're not going to give you a 30-year fixed rate loan. And I guarantee you're not getting a 30-year fixed rate loan from anywhere else. So that's the problem. You're not going to be able to, obtain the financing, or if there's going to be restrictions on it, and you're going to have different interest rates. So buyers are going to be then more cash. And you say, well, that's great. Cash buyers never pay market value, ever, never, ever. If you sold your house for cash, you didn't sell it at market value if they paid cash. I'm just telling you that. They're going to get terms or something that made it so that they got a deal, because cash talks. And that's what's, when it becomes that situation that the only source of financing, I've seen a couple places listed recently, and you look at it and you say, wow, why wouldn't somebody, that's cheap. Why wouldn't somebody buy that? Well, the reason they wouldn't buy it is you can't get financing for it. It's mixed use. You can't get financing for it. So as a community becomes overall mixed use, because part of it's a hotel basically, and part of it's an association or individual units, then you're going to have that kind of problem. The other thing you run the risk of, and we've got more of those in big tourist communities like Orlando. There's situations where hotels come in and basically take the units over, and buy out the units and start running large condotels. And that is a whole nother area of problem, including there's been significant fraud involved in those situations where the the people that were running the hotels, condo hotels, were keeping large blocks of funds that were supposed to go to the association for reserves and other things, and they were using those for their own benefit. So, it is an issue. You gotta decide if you really want to be in the Airbnb business, or you want to be in that kind of business. Then, my personal opinion is you should go ahead and move to someplace that isn't governed by an association, because that's not fair. If you're moving into a place that's a residential community where a bunch of people have agreed to move there, and then you're turning it into a rental community or a hotel community, or buy an apartment building and rent out all the units, but don't go take advantage of an association that already exists, and never intended for that to happen. Um, and I understand what you're saying, Peter. There's a lot of shift in that lately. People have started shifting over, but if I was in a place like that, I'd start looking for some other alternative. I like I'm in a unit. I have a unit that's in a community that you can't, you're no longer able to rent until you've been in it a year. I'm grandfathered in. That makes my unit very valuable. So I love it as a rental, but I wouldn't like it if everybody was renting their units, because the community wouldn't be as nice as it is. So
Yeah, that is a fairly common restriction you see placed in documents where you're trying to slow down or discourage or stop the investor buyer, by putting in that you can't rent for the first year or 2 years. I've seen more. That is that's pretty prevalent now. Again, just to try to try to stem that tide.
yeah, the it's a tough situation, because you're walking a line between at some point, because we've all really experienced it in the last 10 years or so. We've experienced a situation where where the homeowners couldn't pay their assessments.
Yeah, I know, because I was just about to say, you've made some pretty good arguments in the past about you shouldn't crack down too heavy on being able to rent.
Right.
Because there are times, like when we had the recession, where you need people to be able to rent so they can pay their assessments or whatever.
Right.
So, like with most things, there's always the other side of the coin, the other, side of the argument. Where if you prohibit all rentals or you make it so difficult, that could have a negative impact when the economy goes south.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act between extremes. The extremes are, out there. The overnight Airbnb is one thing. The restriction where you can't lease, that's kind of the other side of it, which is really restricted.
Because I remember back then, when in the 2006, 7, whatever years those were, where associations rolled back their leasing restrictions.
Sure.
And made it easier to lease just because so many people were struggling. So anyway.
Well, and we did that. We did that here for a number of reasons. One real practical reason is a lot of our buyers were coming from the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, and they were. I remember we used to get a lot of cops and others who were close to retirement, and so they were buying their retirement home. So they would come in here and buy a unit,
lease it until they retire,
right,
and then move down.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And for most of them, it might have been 3 to 5 years or whatever, and then they were gonna. But if they hadn't been able to, first of all, borrow the money to get into the community, and second of all, hadn't been able to to do that, they wouldn't have bought now. They would have waited, or maybe not bought at all. And it's funny, and my mom was in that situation. Mom and dad were in that situation. They when they moved down here, they were renting a unit up in Evergreen, up in Port St. Lucie, which is a nice little community, and they were fortunate. It was a GDC community, and so and I remember at the original owner of the property, he paid about $65,000 or something. It was, $5 down and $10 a month for the rest of your life type deal. But he was a New York cop, and he was planning on retiring in like 10 years. And so, he rented it to my mom and dad, who were perfect tenants, because they were going to stay there till they died. So they were, and they weren't very, the only kids were my brother, who was handicapped, and so it wasn't like they were disruptive and had anything like that. So it was actually a perfect situation for him, and but he and then he ended up selling the unit to my mom and dad for actually what he paid for it, only because he said, "Look, I'm moving over to the West Coast. You've paid the whole time. Just take it. As long as I get my money back, you can go ahead and take it." So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, that's the other thing. Then people change and they go someplace else. But having the ability to buy your unit, get it paid for before you get here, I think a lot of people are looking at some of that, especially if they want to stretch a little bit. Maybe they want to get something right on the beach and oceanfront and all that kind of thing, and those units are higher. Maybe they're looking at saying, well, if I could get that and I could rent it for 5 years, I could cover my costs, supplement a little from my money while I'm working, and then when I'm retired, go ahead and pay it off or buy it out or whatever. And it does make a difference. Those are, and you say, well, that's one person or two people. Well, if it's, let's say, 3 people that make that decision over a 1 year period of time, that's 3% of your association. If it's 100 units, so 3% makes a difference. It brings down the prices. Plus, it affects the comps, and so that makes it even more difficult when you're trying to borrow. So anyway, so it's going to be this is one of the issues that I think is probably the most pressing right now, because I do think we're going to potentially see a period of time coming up where we may have some issues again. Right now it's just the opposite. It's just so many people who want to buy so few units. But so we'll see what happens. But I think that finding a balance here. I don't think the answer is letting everybody come down for COVID vacations. That's the claim now. Is the new thing is people come down on not on a seasonal basis. Those people have been here every year forever, and they're one of the community. But people are doing Airbnbs for a weekend to try to come down here and get shots because they can't get them where they live. And it's not, and they're vaccine vacations.
Yeah.
And people are going to do that. It's nothing if they have to pay a little bit to come to Florida for a couple weeks or a week so that they can schedule. And then of course everybody's calling in to make the appointment. So you call in from wherever you're calling from, make the appointment, and give them an address, book it, and go. So that's another factor that comes in here. We just have to be careful of. So otherwise we got our own people are going to have problems. Our own residents are going to have issues, including our snowbirds. I'm counting those in because they are here for a long period of time and have been part of the community for a long period of time. So anyway, otherwise, I know Allison's presentation last week was good. Hopefully we'll get a follow-up. All of this stuff will change in the next few weeks, I guess.
We'll follow up as the session goes on and you have a clearer picture of where these bills are.
Yeah.
They because the bills change, and sometimes I don't think these are going to die in committee, but you have a better idea of their chance of passage.
What I think is kind of funny about the way it works here in Florida a little bit is that first of all, there are a lot of these things that don't make it out of committee, but I think it's kind of funny that all of these bills they get proposed and they get sponsors, and they may make it out of committee, they may not make it out of committee. The ones that make it out of committee, they even may have enough support to get passed, and then at the last minute, in the last few days of the session, like three people get together, and it's literally like three people get together to do a budget reconciliation, and that budget reconciliation really determines which ones of these become law and which don't. Because if they don't get funded, or if they don't get put through to get funded, and they get knocked out of the budget bill, they pretty much don't happen, a lot of them. And so it's amazing that in those final days, you've got, the Senate president, the speaker, and the governor, who to a large degree can determine what's going to happen. And and there's a lot of give and take that occurs, but it's kind of concentrated into people who have the authority to really adjust some of these bills at the last minute, particularly if they have a financial aspect to them. So and this year the budget is going to be tight. I think with all the stuff, the revenues are down, the sales tax revenues are down. I think, even though we've had a lot of people moving, I think real estate taxes are not going to be skyrocketing because of the Save Our Homes Amendment and that type of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see what really happens this year and what does go through there. And as Peter and I have experienced in the past, the retrofit for sprinkler systems was, I think it was in every single budget and every single session for years there for a while, and every time it would, and then at least 2 or 3 or 4 of the years it made it all the way to the governor's desk, and he vetoed that portion. So
Yep.
and that's the other thing is it's not like the federal government where it is the whole, either take the whole thing or you take none of it. The governor has some line item veto here, so can if he's not going to sign it, it won't get passed. So that's another factor. They can override that veto, but it's a lot harder when you've got these line item vetoes. It gives them more flexibility and more control. So anyway, so that'll be nice. Take a look at that. And last thing is that I know one of the right now I think we're still probably in a situation that that the boards have the ability to kind of determine some health factors relative to COVID. I think we're still, that hasn't been released yet. Has it still been extended or no?
It's still in effect.
That's what I thought.
Forget the date it runs out, but it's
so I think there is an opportunity. Probably we'll find out based on a court case that's coming up. But I think there is an opportunity to put some restrictions on people if they're going to be if they're going to be in a unit on a rental. I think that all rental applications right now should have some questions relative to recent contact. Some of the same things that they give you when you go to a doctor's office or whatever, relative to have you been in a place, have you been exposed to the virus, and that type of thing. And I think that would be prudent, and you have to have approval, assuming your documents allow for approval, which they should. You have to have approval for that. And if there's some question about that person's health relative to that or anything else, then I think the association could require, particularly as it relates to COVID, could require additional testing before the person could occupy. And that's just a safety factor, because unlike a hotel, most of these condos that are being used as Airbnbs, there's not somebody coming in and spraying the rooms down and disinfecting, and they're not doing all of that kind of thing. It's the common areas aren't being treated the same as the common areas in a hotel. There's not the same level of maintenance, and so for that reason, I think the associations have to be more cautious in terms of making sure that, because the people are going to be exposed in the common areas. So it's something that people need to look at and be more cautious of. And I think there's rules that could be put into play while we're dealing with this that could help restrict an overly aggressive flow of traffic to the units. So anyway, that's just where we are. I think that one of the things that is kind of an opposite scenario and is probably fostering some of this a little bit is that it used to be before you could lease a unit, you had to meet with the person in person. You had to meet with some committee to screen them in person. Now everybody's doing Zoom, and it's pretty hard because that person could be, in California and New York or whatever. They don't have to come down here to meet with somebody, and that makes it a lot easier for you to have the Airbnb situation. Whereas before, there was just some practical restrictions to the turnover of a lease very quickly. I mean, you couldn't get somebody in within, had to wait for a board meeting and all of that. So, it was one of those things that you had, it took realistically 20 or 30 days. You had to have at least a month's notice. So if the person was coming down for a month, you had to have plenty of time to approve them. Even if they're coming down for a day, you had to have plenty of time to approve them. Most people don't want to go through that whole process. So anyway, it's an interesting problem, and we'll see what happens as soon as the COVID situation eases up a little bit. See if it changes. But other than that, Peter, I think did you have a good Valentine's? Everything went good. You had did you guys get to go out and do a few things and experience?
Yeah, we actually went out to dinner at a place where we sit outside. It was nice. So
I went to a place where you sit inside, but we sat 6 feet apart. I'll say who it was. PF Chang's down in Palm Beach County there at the Gardens Mall. Actually,
Gardens Mall, sure.
Yeah,
near me.
Yeah, I actually went to the Gardens Mall while I was there, and I was I thought it was really pretty good. People were like at PF Chang's. They were very careful in terms of seating somebody next to another party that was a large party. They had some tables apart. I remember there was one little table there, and they wouldn't put us there because it was too close to a big party that was right on the other side. So I think people are trying. They're trying to do a good job there. There were a lot of masks when they were inside, not as many masks outside, which is good. Anyway, so it was an interesting weekend. I hope everybody out there had a good weekend, and I hope you're having a good season and having some fun here in Florida. It's a great place to be. And thanks for joining us here. Hopefully this is a great place to be every Monday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock right here on WSTU Digital 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.